features have never been difficult to copy. AI hasn't changed that. It's just made it so much more obvious because the speed at which it can be done is so much quicker now, but it's never been a moat. I really think, especially now, there's only three things that really classify as a moat. One, and even more importantly now, distribution. Two, whether there's actual genuine user love for your product and or your brand. And three, your learning loop.
I think whoever has a system that learns the fastest about what the correct, what the optimal solution is, I think those are the people that win and then can put themselves in a defensible position from there. So that learning loop, and whoever can go through that fastest, I think generally becomes the winner in a market.
And I think fundamentally, like, distribution is great, but it's also pointless if the product isn't great, because you might be able to get it into the hands of 100,000 people, but if they try it and it's shit and they never come back, then you've just wasted loads of money anyway, and you've just wasted that distribution point.
Entrepreneurship has always been cast as the story of the magical founding insight. The idea is so unique, you guard it behind an NDA, build in stealth, and pray no one figures it out before you do. But what if that insight was never really the thing? And what if the software you built around it was never the moat? In this episode of our Consumer Tech series, Neil Tanna from Howbout, Graham Paterson from Jitty, and Mark Martin from True join me.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Let me open with something Neil said in our prep call that I want to put on the table. Software was never the defensible thing. People just thought it was. AI has just made that more visible. Graham, you told me that you rebuilt what took you 3 years and several million pounds in more or less 5 minutes with Claude. So if the cost and time of building is no longer the barrier, what actually wins, Graham?
So I think when you're building an uncertainty and when you're building something new for consumers especially, you're always building on uncertainty. I think whoever has a system that learns the fastest about what the correct, what the optimal solution is, I think those are the people that win and then can put themselves in a defensible position from there. So that learning loop, and whoever can go through that fastest, I think generally becomes the winner in a market.
Something that I think I've always believed is, especially like coming into the world and building in consumer social, like software, there's never been a moat. I think people are just really starting to say it like it's a massive statement right now. But like when I was at uni and excuse me, and I was like looking at Snapchat and it was blowing up, and then all of a sudden, stories was copied and then lenses was copied, software has never been difficult to copy. Features have never been difficult to copy. AI hasn't changed that. It's just made it so much more obvious because the speed at which it can be done is so much quicker now, but it's never been a moat. And I really think, especially now, there's only three things that really classify as a moat. One, and even more importantly now, distribution. Two, whether there's actual genuine user love for your product and or your brand. And three, your learning loop. I think right now AI has made it easier to learn, but that compounding edge of like every experiment teaches you something about your users that a competitor with no users cannot learn. They can ship a new product quickly, they can copy a thing, but they can't copy your experimentation cycle. And that's fundamentally how you can build faster and faster, but then ship things that actually are going to resonate and move the needles more. Like that's fundamentally the moat over someone who's just able to copy your software. They've always been able to do that.
I've promised you all three that we will spend the majority of today talking about the learning loop and fast iteration and so on, because it is the real thing that is truly changing right now. But I think let's stay, of course, on distribution and user love, but just 1 second, stay on that product development part, because I want to pressure you a little bit on whether that has changed, or to the extent that it has changed. And also, in the end, like, is there not still this true founding insight behind a company that you then used to be able to build at least a year or something like that, a bit under the radar? We all know that everyone says on LinkedIn, stealth startup is what they're building. Do you truly think that there's never been any truth to that getting started with a unique insight and building away a bit in the darkness, so to say, was valuable and put you ahead of the competition? Mike, I'll let you answer as the VC guy with the grand perspective, and then we'll bring Neil and Graham in as well.
No, I do agree in that, ultimately AI is just software, but I think the speed of iteration, speed to market is what's changing. I mean, for us, it's one aspect of things that we're looking at, right? It's not the only thing. The speed at which founders can move is clearly like very important. I think it stems from something that we've talked on the show about before, which is like customer centricity and obsession about the customer problem. And so the signal that we're looking for in intensity of experiments, thirst for taking on feedback from customers and iterating the product is almost like a window into that founder obsession around that customer problem and the ambition to build the best product experience possible. Clearly, if the founders have personal insight or like a lived experience in that, that is definitely a head start, but I don't think it doesn't mean it's not copyable, right? And so today you're still able to have people copying ideas. And so back to Graham and Neil's points around just that complete obsession around customer, iterating quickly, feedback loops, and effectively how fast you can do that in a balanced way. And I'm sure we'll sort of come to it later in the podcast, but I'm very intrigued about how particularly founders today are balancing that speed of shipping and balancing that with like, how do we still land the best product experience? I think that's like, it feels to me like a very hard thing to do. So I'm sort of curious as we, go through the pod, how you guys are thinking about that.
I suppose it's actually made your life a little bit harder, Mike, right, as a pre-seed seed investor, because it's been the fact that it's not difficult now for anyone with an idea to ship a MVP or a V1 of a product. It's probably meaning that you're getting a lot more come through the door, especially at pre-seed. And so it's harder it's a good thing, right? Fundamentally, the lack of technical ability is no longer a reason for why people can't become founders. But the negative of that is you must see a lot more slop come through the door of people who just don't have the determination, the way of thinking about it, and not just experimentation, but just how to fundamentally build a massive business. But how do you must see a lot more come through your mailbox, right?
Yeah, and look, I agree with you, as in not necessarily say it's making our jobs harder, because that just is the job. And I guess the earlier you invest, the more you are backing the founders to like figure that out. And so you're buying into their ambition, their mindset, their obsession about, like I said again, the customer problem and how they're going to figure that out. I do think it's great, though, to your point, just on innovation for the consumer, like how exciting I think the next 5 or 10 years is going to be for consumers to like completely reimagine all experiences across different consumer categories. So that's very exciting. Yes, for sure, it makes people's jobs harder, both founders and investors. I think it's hard for everyone, but I think that fundamentally that's should be great for the consumer in the long term.
When I look at a bunch of the really great founders that I venerate, the thing, like very few of them actually approach something with a kind of unique insight of, I lived this thing in this industry and I just wanted to solve it. Like the ones that I know of is like Will Shu at Deliveroo got frustrated at not being able to order nice takeaways to the office. It's not like this crazy unique insight. It's more like a man on a mission. And Krista and Tava at TransferWise were not international money people. They were international people who were like, oh, this should be better. And for us, we had the same insight in real estate is going, well, this sucks. There must be a better way of doing it, rather than coming in and saying, right, here's our unique angle right now. I think almost the real entrepreneurial skill set is not having that insight, but it's being able to turn it into something. I guess to Neil's point is like, there are going to be so many more people now who can turn up with something looking really polished, but lack that, whatever it is, skill set to say, cool, I'm going to hustle to get intros to VCs and make those pitches and do some sales calls and get some people along on the journey with me and take 100 no's without like losing too much enthusiasm and motivation. Those are the weird bits that I think were always a bit more of a barrier to getting started. Whereas like now I can create something in Claude literally like in the 10 minutes before I fall asleep, Whereas before it would take me to go like to a friend or someone be like, hey, can you code this thing? And it would take a couple of weeks rather than a couple of minutes. But I think the main filter, stumbling point, will always be that first major one where it's like, oh shit, this is hard now. What's the hard bit? And I'm guessing you're laughing, because I'm guessing you took a lot of no's.
That's it, man. I agree with you wholeheartedly, man. Like a lot of people out there, like ideas are cheap. Ideas have always been cheap. It's about the thing that, how do I take this idea and turn it into a $1 billion business? And the idea just, I'm laughing because I remember in my naivety in my early days when I had this, what I thought was such a revolutionary idea, making it easier to find time with your friends. And I would get like people to, I would like ask if people would sign NDAs and things like that for this, just this idea that I thought would change the world. And actually you realize that the idea is actually nothing about. The great thing is the fact that 1,000 people have had that same idea just in London. And actually you realize that the fact that everyone's had the same idea just makes it easier to share the idea. You don't have to do as much selling. But I totally agree with all the points you're making. It's the determination. It's what gets you to run through the door that you're facing, not just the idea you've had. And AI's made it easier for only part of that, but definitely not the running through the door part.
And I guess on like the kind of the overall theme here, I think that early stage of going, I've got this idea, and then over however long you turn that into the actual business, the actual thing. And I don't know about for you, Neil, but for us, like, it's such a different thing. Like the thing we've got now is just like, in some ways, almost unrecognizable from the initial idea. And it was that early learning process of being really brutal with it that lets us now do the kind of, our learning process is now more about refinement rather than like trying to work out where the opportunity lies.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And the bar keeps moving. Right? I remember when we really started spending time in the US and US VCs, and the phenomenal partner used to be at General Catalyst, Nico, said to us, or he was saying to a group of us, you know, he doesn't really take any ideas serious now if they can't, or in consumer, if they can't already generate 100,000 users without marketing spend, without any spend. And it's because in this day and age, in a world where distribution is kind of a moat, but it's also from the perspective of, if you've built a good consumer idea, especially for a teenager, and you can't show me that you can already get 100,000 people using it through Instagram, TikTok, word of mouth, network effects, well, are you really building something that's going to change the world? And so like the bar does keep moving. AI is only moving it further and further now because there are further things that like you should just be able to do by yourself. But the determination side of what you're saying, I totally agree with that. That bar's always been there.
I think there's a long conversation to be had clearly about what makes a startup baggable, and is there something about the fact that there is a unique insight and access to that insight that resides only with that founder and probably not that many else. Also, oftentimes you tie that to inflection points in the market, and that's a bit what many VCs would describe that they're looking for. But we're not here to talk only about the early stages and how you think about the founding insight, though of course it does create a bit of a moat in the beginning. The real focus here should be on how we're creating moats as consumer startups. And I think that we should, before we go to learning loops, then go to distribution and user love. And if we start on distribution, because you just mentioned it, Neil, this concept of being able to generate 100,000 users on a whim almost, or right off the bat without having any VC money raised and so on and so forth. Mike, maybe you can comment on that statement. It's a pretty radical statement. Do you agree with it? What does it tell you about distribution as a moat in today's market? Because in the past, you would have said, well, if you can get to 100,000 users, if we remember back to the good old Facebook days and the social network movie, well, obviously distribution and the fact that you can show early traction, even in pretty small numbers, was a very significant achievement. But we are at a very different place today, and for that reason, maybe distribution is much less of a moat today.
Look, I think I agree with distribution being really important, because like fundamentally, if you can solve for that without needing to spend loads of money fighting, other people in Meta and Google, that's a huge structural advantage. So like the best products, you want like built-in network effects so that you don't have to do that. So that is like, and that is a real moat as well, like those network effects and also people being locked into the product. I mean, you hear about people who have they're like really good about like at a moment in time, they found something that works, like, and whether it's about their TikTok videos going viral or whatever it might be. And that's great, but I don't think that's necessarily like a sustainable structural advantage, because the distribution channels are changing all the time. The consumers who are interacting with those channels are changing all the time. So you need to almost be, your team needs to have the mindset of almost like trading and being really in touch with what is happening with those channels, what works, what doesn't work, how to pivot when things aren't working. So I think that's like a capability within the team that needs to be there and be built on over time. And I think fundamentally, like, distribution is great, but it's also pointless if the product isn't great, because you might be able to get it into the hands of 100,000 people, but if they try it and it's shit and they never come back, then you've just wasted loads of money anyway, and you've just wasted that distribution point. So distribution is fundamentally a very important part of accessing customers and building a business, but I don't think it's as simple as saying distribution is a moat. I think it can be, depending on your product and depending on the team. Is definitely a critical part of building a big business. But you know, if you build a software product or even a physical product and you have a consumer, a celebrity alongside it, right? You might be able to reach millions of people. They might buy it or download it, but if it's not good enough, then they're never coming back, and you potentially haven't, you might not have made any money on that first use of product anyway. So it can be a waste of time. So I think you have to have the combination of distribution and the great product experience to make it work.
Yeah, and I think that if we should just tie a knot on this distribution point, I think the point that you're all saying here is it's not that distribution is not massively important. Obviously it is, but it's just that everyone will be fighting for distribution and everyone will constantly be getting better and better at it. And you want to have that network effect. You want to have all the things that make your flywheel of distribution get ever more powerful. But what really matters is whether you have that learning capability within the organization to constantly enhance and improve your distribution via your learning loops that you keep doing. Am I right in saying that that's kind of the distinguishing factor here, where because distribution has gotten somewhat acquirable, both non-organically, so to say, or inorganically, and because it is now pretty well described how you unlock distribution, then that can no longer be, that's not the distinguishing factor of a very good founding team and a very good company building activity. It's really whether you have that learning loop that then empowers your distribution and make it more and more powerful. Am I somewhat correct in what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think we're all in competition, right? We're all in competition with other startups, incumbents, new players, et cetera, and it is critical that our products are constantly getting better and better, because to Mike's point, we can't just rely on just distribution as always, but like the product thing, exactly the same. Our products have to improve to stay relevant, and so by building fast experiments, flywheels allows us to have far more high quality shots on goals to find that next thing that is either going to make our product itself far better, distribution better, maybe both, but that is what's ultimately going to either turn us into a unicorn faster or even at all, but beat the incumbents or the other startups out there. So for sure, once you have got over that cold start problem, AI in itself, but also just generally an experimental culture can be the difference between you winning or losing. I definitely agree with that.
Okay, guys, so if we accept this premise that the edge is really how well and how fast you learn, then that means that the conversation becomes, what does a good experiment look like? And I think it's fair to say that run more experiments is very bad advice to come away from this podcast with. So if we try and get a bit more specific so that we spend the rest of the episode thinking about that and talking about how do you then build an organization that's very good at this. If we start from the foundation, let's just describe what is an experiment in this context of getting better feedback loops inside of a consumer company. Neil, you had a good distinction in the pre-call for this conversation, so I'd love for you to start.
Yeah, so the way we think about this internally is you have to separate what is an experiment versus just what's shipping and hoping. And an experiment for us starts with, right, so what is we set quarterly goals, right? We have 3 quarterly goals, and they're around growth, monetization, and retention. And so let's just, for example, take our growth goal. We have metrics we want to move. So the metrics we want to move our word of mouth coefficient, we want to move our K factor. Then let's just say we're focusing here on our word of mouth coefficient. We will set hypotheses that we will hopefully prove or disprove that can move the word of mouth coefficient, and then build experimental features, tests, etc. that look to move or disprove or prove that hypothesis. So everything must have a hypothesis, and then we determine how we want to test it. As an A/B test, as an ABC test, like what metric, what market, etc., etc. But it all must start from a hypothesis, not just, hey, we've thought of this new feature, what do we think about it? It actually all will start from a hypothesis, which ladders down from a goal.
We try to apply that even in the earlier stages, because as we're building new features, I try to distinguish between, let's say, like an experiment and a bet. And a bet is one of those things we will not be able to tell for a very long time if this has worked or not. We're going to do it and assess in, let's say, 6 months rather than 2 weeks. And we need to not worry about measuring it too much as we go, but we do need to learn. So a really useful way for us to learn is to do targeted research and conversations with users, with people, and go, even going online, looking for those conversations and saying, what do people think about this thing? I find framing even that research as a hypothesis of, we think if we create a feature that lets people do ABC, they will do behavior XYZ, which will help us in the following ways as a business. And you can often tell quite early on, get more and more validation that, if we do ABC, users will do XYZ because they keep complaining about problem XYZ in frame it, so we can do that. So I think even from the earliest stages, having everything framed as that hypothesis keeps you aligned. I think especially as you're delegating, working with other people, asking them to do this research, and experimentation, it's a lot easier for them to come back to answer a single question. Because that's all a hypothesis is, right? It's kind of like a question saying, if we do this, we think this will happen. Is that right? That's a lot easier than saying to someone, here's a feature, go do it, go work on it, go see if we should do it. They can come back with 100 different answers, all of which are correct, but don't answer the question that you actually care about. So just framing it in that way, I think is incredibly helpful, all across the board.
Or there could have been 3 other features that could have actually been much better at moving that hypothesis. If you thought about it from the perspective of the hypothesis, if someone, we talk about this a lot internally, someone might come with the best feature, but actually there might be an even better idea if we can understand what that feature is looking to achieve, and then focusing on actually trying to do that than just trying to ship this feature. But we think about this, and actually very similar to you, we don't call them bets, we call them, the word we use internally right now is remarkability. So using your framework of a bet, what do we have low confidence on, but if we get it right, really could move the needle. Those are really important in product, because otherwise, if you be too scientific with it, you never you would have ever, if you had only ever tried to do incremental improvements, you would have just got the faster horse. You would have never got the car. That mentality. So here, you do need to focus on your bets, and your bets by definition don't really have much behind them. We look at that from the sense of how could we make our product at its core even more remarkable, such that it may increase our word of mouth coefficient or our K factor. So they're still working towards the same hypotheses, but just have different legs behind them or different data points I need to prove about whether they should even make it on our roadmap or not.
So that's such a good point, because I think one of the bit that's quite hard is as a founder and a VC, right? You just get really used to I wouldn't even call it power law, but of just very few things will have this huge outsized impact. And as a business, you need to continually do them. Whereas when you explain to your friends and family, oh, that's unlikely to work, why would you do it? And the answer is because if it does, the payoff is so big. Understandably, most people just aren't comfortable with that level of placing bets on the long shots. And so if someone accidentally optimizes for, in this quarter, I want to get as many hypotheses correct as possible, you're fantastic. It's very easy to have almost no impact because you've proven yes to a bunch of easy stuff that doesn't make sense. Whereas if it's here's a goal, it's really outsized and almost unreachable, see what you can do to get there, and embedding that kind of embedding that culturally to people, I think is really useful. Hypotheses mixed with This is real like long shot breakthrough mentality. So I think
Yeah.
remarkability is a good framing.
And this then ties back into how we do these experimentations and sort of how we can teach it as a moat intended, because like using the bet analogy, the question that we always ask ourselves is like, well, what's the worst case if this were to go wrong? Because if, for example, we really don't do well and it actually damages our word of mouth coefficient or our K factor, well, then we want to start in a market that actually we don't care as much about. So for us, that's our Australian market. So like our power, like, you know, our most important markets are the US and the UK. We will never do a bet in the US or the UK. We will start in Australia. But then the flip side is that you hit a volume bottleneck, right? The US and the UK are far larger markets. So if it's something, to your point, Graham, you might not see the results in a while. Well, then just starting in a tiny market isn't going to allow you to do that at speed. And so it's a constant debate about where the experimentation should be done. But the fact that the audience has already been built allows that to be faster.
Does that mean that it becomes, or I guess it's a question, does it become harder to take those bets the bigger the platform or the bigger the user base becomes? Because obviously in some ways, the more users you have, the better. But to your point on damaging the kind of...
No, not necessarily. Like I said, like we have over 7 million users, right? We can take a high risk experiment and still only do it to 70,000 of them. But 70,000 people is an awesome test bed that is not going to move the needles of our entire user base, but it's still a big enough audience to get statistical significance and not damage our network effects. The key with us is obviously we're a business built on network effects, and so we kind of need to do experiments to the entire network. Sometimes you don't have to, but if, for example, we are doing something that certain users in a network or a friendship group have and others don't, it can really negate the test as a whole, because some of them are then complaining, well, why don't I have this feature? Or many of our features are used by the entire group. So that can make things more challenging, which is why we do our experiments geo-controlled rather than just a random sample of using my 70,000. And that's why Australia is so good, because it's just the network effects are within the country, but also it's an English-speaking country. It mirrors a lot of the behaviors of sort of other Western countries, and so it's a great testing bed for us. And sometimes we get it massively right and we put it over, and sometimes we don't, and then we're glad we tested in Australia.
I guess like the way I think about your question, Mike, is like it depends on how much the business is willing to absorb that risk. Because I've been in plenty of businesses where as soon as they get their first 100,000 users, you can see like, okay, we don't want to upset anything. We are now very, very risk averse. Whereas, you know, I think that's why companies like Facebook that kept the founder on for so long are able to keep taking those big swings, because it takes someone to say, I'm really comfortable with this risk, like at the top. Whereas as soon as you hire, I don't know, a professional CEO, or like it, as soon as the culture starts to change. So I think that's more of a cultural thing than a like technical capability.
Guys, now we've just defined what an experiment looks like, the importance of forming hypotheses and framing everything as an hypothesis rather than an execution problem for the sales team to solve. I think those are really important. But let's go to then running experiments at scale. Neil, I think you described it quite well in our pre-call as well. You have 7 million users across 125 countries. I'd love to understand from you, how do you use that as a testing environment, and what does that experiment pipeline look like? And I think that if we tie this back into the opening of this conversation as well, the AI moment is meaning that we're going from running 5 experiments at one time to running 5,000 experiments. So I'm very curious to hear how your machines of experimentation have evolved.
Yeah, we're definitely running far more experiments than we ever have before. 1, because we can ship faster. 2, because we can analyze faster. And so it's all a compounding benefit as to why we can run so many. But we grade our hypothesis and our features by their risk profile, and everything is like what is the metric we're trying to move? Like, what is the primary like goal, or what does success look like? And then everything has a guardrail metric, right? And so like if something is trying to shift K factor, we will check to see if it will have a detrimental impact on retention, and we will always assess that. And then the markets we pick are depending on the risk profile and the grading we give it. But Australia, like I was just saying, is our high risk market, English speaking, behaviorally similar to the US, UK, but it's just not a strategic priority for us. So it's great for us to run really risky monetization tasks or anything that could damage word of mouth or anything that is just so novel from like a user experience perspective. You throw it to Australia. Anything that is we want high volume for, but we want it to be a more controlled test, we will pick certain states in the US, right? There's 50 to choose from. It's an awesome platform to enable us to go A, B, C, D, E, et cetera, tests. We pick the states with similar demographics and we just run our different variants there. So, for example, before we launched our subscription paywall 6 months ago, we ran a test to restrict certain of our existing features behind the paywall, and we wanted to see which ones would lead to the most conversion to subscription without having a detrimental impact on K-factor, word of mouth, retention. And so we just ran multiple different variant tests in multiple different states. So, for example, Florida, Texas, California, we will restrict different features, and then we'll analyze the primary metric versus the guardrail. And then occasionally we will use non-English speaking countries for lower sort of strategic, because they're still lower strategic markets, but we want to see the impact that maybe different languages or locales have on our different variants tests. So like sort of Germany and Netherlands is a good one. They still do have a great English speaking demographic versus, for example, France. And then last of all will be the UK. It is our core market. So we will go there when we want to do sort of specific pricing tests, for example, because we've got a ton of volume. And it's obviously where our network is densest, but it's the last market that we will go for risky changes. Saying all that, with AI, the speed that will now ship to the UK is far faster, right? So it's not like we have to wait a long time. It's just we want to make sure that if there's anything that will damage or could damage metrics, we haven't launched it in the UK. That's how we go about way. So thinking.
We had similar when I was at Deliveroo. One of the jobs I had was product manager on the logistics algorithms. So your kind of back-end service that picked which ride to go through, and had this massive, crazy like network effects problem in that you couldn't experiment by applying the test versus control algorithm to one rider versus another, because you need to see how they act in aggregate. And whichever market you tested on and when you tested on would be hugely influential on the outcome. So if you tested on a Saturday night in central London, the results would be insane compared to like a Monday morning in Bath. And so what we had to do was like carve up like all of the world into these little zones that were kind of, I guess, like slightly discrete, so like just separate from each other, and then apply it to each one day on, day off for each one for a 2-week period to make sure we kind of canceled out any effects of which zone it was, so like where it was, time of day, day of week, weather, things like that, to get kind of the full picture. So that's how we approached the challenge of making sure that we gathered as many data points as possible by including our kind of core markets like London and Paris, without taking on too much risk of getting it catastrophically wrong, which did happen once or twice, and you got to turn it off quite quickly and eat humble pie quite a lot. It's funny because we are currently at such a kind of comparatively early stage that a lot of times for us, experimentation is not about measuring, did this move the needle, and are we 95th percentile confidence that it did, and more like, did this not something up, and are we really confident that it hasn't completely bottomed out the metric, or can we see like a crazy big growth? And I think at the earlier stages, it's still really useful to kind of run those experiments, even if you're not going to see anything most of the time, because it does just give you a really great signal one way or the other, so you at least learn like that. So we're currently in that position where our experimentation is to like just see, do we get any crazy strong signal in one direction?
Mike, you have a vantage point across a portfolio of consumer investments, of course. Can you talk a bit about how you've seen scale of experimentation change over these past 2-3 years?
I wouldn't be able to give you specifics, to be honest. I know that, as we've talked about before, definitely like being able to utilize AI software just to accelerate stuff and just do more experiments. So I think it's just made it easier to do more. I'm curious actually to understand from Neil and Graham to what extent you're either building your own software or using stuff off the shelf to be able to like do many more micro experiments? Or like which part of it, like are there ways of automating like getting feedback from customers, or like I guess analyzing the qualitative versus the quantitative stuff?
Yeah, no, so it's not that we've got no external software that's made like testing faster or easier. Like all of the UX and UI experiments that we're doing, it's not like, for example, we have a tool that's got a paywall, got 1,000 versions of it and is shipping out or anything like that. We internally are able to ship quicker because of AI, and we're able to analyze quicker because of AI, and that has enabled experimentation to 10x. But since we've started, I've built this software internally. So like there are external software tools that allow you to build feature toggle system, experimentation toggles, ABCD, test experimentation toggles. But we've always had those built internally because it enables us to be very, very, very specific with how we do our testing, because every test we want to run differently. Sometimes we want to do it where we want to specifically target it just to specific networks. Other times it's countries, other times it's phone numbers, other times it's based on interest, etc., etc. So it's a bit too nuanced to what was out there. I'm sure though nowadays with AI there are some incredible tools out there. But the main thing is that it's enabled us to ship and analyze so many more tests weekly, and then we review those tests weekly. But I think if you were allowing AI to just run off with the experiments, it still needs to know the hypothesis and the metrics it's trying to move. So still fundamentally, there will always be a sort of a UX UI angle to it.
I was actually about to ask you exactly about that question of how far are you, or how far do you, based on what you kind of see in the market and from friends and so on, see that we are from allowing AI to run experimentation on its own? Like we all know that there are these websites now where you'll have a web shop and it'll be a closed environment, and you can run your website instead of running it on the good old software. You'll run it on an AI system that automatically optimizes based on how user behavior is. Are we there where you can do that inside your live launched apps? Or are we where, this is quite a while before we let AI run wild, changing colors on dots?
I actually think we're almost there. Like from an experimentation perspective, just touching on that, like sometimes it's just binary. You just want A, B, like does this or does this not move it? But we increasingly are running A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. tests, because to what Graham and I were talking about, I think there are so many different ways that you can prove or disprove something. So let's say, for example, we're trying to increase conversion at our paywall, and we're just experimenting with the copy that exists at the top of the paywall. There are so many different variants that we can do to test that. Now, in the past, if you're just limited by human analysis, you just would probably want to do one at a time so you can see the impact it's having, and that's really, really slow. But if you've got a big enough audience where you can get statistical significance and you can run significant number of experiments there, then AI is only going to make that easier. And yeah, you don't even need the human to determine what the copy should be. Like AI can come up with that copy, AI can run the experiment, and AI can analyze it and tell you which one came out top. So like we are definitely there, and we're already doing that internally as well. But from a design perspective, like at the moment, it still needs human taste, we find. So like, for example, we use Claude Design, and Claude Design is brilliant, but none of it, like, you know, when you see these like new AI startup websites, and they're just like, whatever the company is, let's just for the sake of the argument say that the AI is called Neil. I'm like, Neil, produce me a report. It just acts like that report is perfect, and I'm shipping it straight to my board, and I needed no changes, no edits. It's not like that in real life, and neither is design. So it's not like I can use Claude Design and be like, hey, I'm Claude, I want a new paywall design. And it's like here, and it's pixel perfect. And so the difficulty is those designs need to be perfected in Figma. But then it's actually quite difficult. Claude Design, we've personally found it a bit fiddly to edit nuance specifically within the Claude interface. And then you obviously can't directly rebuild it into Figma. We are experimenting with Figma Make. So we're there, but we're not fully there yet from a design perspective and a human taste perspective. But yeah, if you just wanted to, hey, AI run 100 different paywall experiments, just focus on the top copy and increase conversion. That is wicked, but you need a large enough audience where you can get statistical significance to move that running multiple variants such where AI is the benefit over a human doing it anyway.
I think like there's certain elements of websites, and I'd argue most, annoyingly Neil's yours is an example where it's not, but like I think for most the UI adds like no value. Like there's no uniqueness or innovation or whatever that you need. If you've got a checkout screen, it needs to look like every other checkout screen. That's like the most valuable thing you can do. I think that's where like over time we saw everyone converge to looking like Amazon, when you've got trends like long shadow back in the day and whatever else that like always come up and everything starts to look similar and then change. And I think that's where you could quite easily apply AI to say, look, here's our checkout page, just test a bunch of variants. You know where to go. You can get inspiration from just looking at other checkout pages, put them there. It's low risk, and then it's quite unlikely that AI is going to come up with a system that offends anyone, come up with the best one. I think you can probably apply that to most UI challenges. Like I said, Neil, I think with you folks, building like a shared social calendar is one of the few, like genuinely, like you're inventing a thing that, at least for me, like hasn't really existed before. But I think for most people, you will eventually be able to kind of experiment your way through it, or even over time, Claude Code will just learn this is kind of what works. Do this and don't bother.
Yeah, you know what? It's a really good example you give, because if we just like, something like our social calendar keeps going viral on TikTok, and it keeps going viral because it's a prettier, cooler version of a calendar than an 18-year-old has seen before. So if we gave our calendar to AI and said, hey, help me improve this, it'd probably just make it look like all the other calendars that already exist out there, right? But it's the fact that our calendar doesn't look like Outlook, Apple, Google Calendar that's actually made it distinctive enough to go viral. So that's where the human taste aspect is actually really critical, but also where continuous experimentation for us is super important, that we continue making it stronger and stronger. Because fundamentally, going back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, the way our calendar looks isn't in and of itself going to be a strong enough moat, because another startup tomorrow could just build a new calendar designed, if not the exact same way, maybe even slightly nicer. So this is where the distribution point comes in, right? It's like you only need one calendar on your phone. An 18-year-old does not need 4 calendars like they need 4 dating apps. It will be a winner-take-all market, and that's where distribution can be the moat. That's where brand can be the moat, because there's already a tool out there. It's like, I don't know, Mike, for example, if you use like Google Calendar, I might say to you, hey, I've got the best new calendar ever for B2B. And you're going to be like, cool, doesn't really matter. It needs to be 100 times better for me to justify moving across all of my content and the fact that your network is already on there. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit prettier or a little bit more useful. And that's where having an existing audience and brand, but also just the transfer cost of moving and the annoyance of it, can all of these things be super impactful just in an AI world or not?
I actually wanted to close on that note of tying it back to the distribution power, because I imagine that given that we now have this superpower of being able to run a ton of tests at the same time, it could be thought to also compound further that you already have a big audience, because you're then able to run bigger experiments more quickly. Will we get even more powerful winner-takes-all dynamics? Or will it be leveled out further because everyone can compete to get in now?
Yeah, no, like the learning rate is a function of your audience size, right? So like with 7 million users, a 1% effect for us is, we can figure that out in days. But if we only had 7,000 users, and needing the same 1% effect would take us a lot longer, especially if we want statistical significance. And by then the market's already moved on. So I definitely think that AI lowers the cost needed for each experiment, but it doesn't really change the bigger the audience, the smaller the effects that we need to see to be able to detect if we figured out something, and then the more shots we can take on goal. When we were smaller, the only really impact that we could have was qual. Right now, with a larger audience, we can test far more, and I think that's not necessarily just like 50 times more features that we can fit. It's 50 times more sort of like correct decisions that we can make forward.
your larger companies will always be able to learn and always have been able to learn. And it's not really the rate of learning that has stopped them from moving. It's a new entrant that either has a counterposition business model or some brand edge they can't get. So if you took like the Facebook Snapchat story that Neil used earlier, literally about stories, was Snapchat can learn that quickest and do it quicker, and Facebook can go, great, we're going to take that and put it here. Thank you. We've got superior numbers. So like your rate of learning doesn't really matter. And then the reason that, from what I can tell, that Facebook has never really managed to kill Snap, and I don't really use either, I think is because Snap has the brand with the younger generations that like, they want to go there to message because Facebook is weird and WhatsApp is maybe like kind of acceptable, but just. And then they've managed to keep that brand thing, and Facebook can never shift its brand to do the stuff that Snap does and like probably wouldn't want to. So I think it's a really good example where rate of learning is very, very useful for people to start accelerating and kind of get that position, but it's not ultimately an sensible thing. It's more something around like, you know, whichever of the 7 powers you want to pick. I think you're never going to learn so fast that you can beat an absolute mammoth. You got to do something different.
Totally.
So everyone in the audience, those that thought, was Mike in this conversation? He was. He's just a great VC that lets founders talk when they have something to say. So the three of you, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Mike, Neil, and Graham, you're incredible people. You're building important stuff. I am so thankful to know you. Thank you.